Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to our first Linux demo. Tonight we're going to cover what is Linux, a very brief history of Linux, some of the differences and distributions of Linux, and some of the neater things you can do with Linux. I'll be the first presenter, Lost the second presenter, and my dad will be the third presenter. We also have some people here that are familiar with Linux machines. They're going to tell you about their experiences with Linux. They're going to show you, you're perfectly welcome to use their desktops and kind of play around with them. Hopefully with the demo tonight, a pretty good idea of what Linux is and why you may or may not want to look at Linux switching to it. I'm going to give you a very brief history of Linux, and then after that, I'll turn it over to our second presenter, who will go into some of the distributions and some of the flavors of Linux and some of the details of it. Okay, well, what is Linux? Linux is an operating system, just like Microsoft Windows is an operating system, IBM VAX is an operating system, D is an operating system, and C. The primary program that runs in your computer that lets you coordinate all the different devices, the user interface, and lets you launch, control, and execute programs. You're used to dealing with Microsoft, probably, and their Explorer interface is a user interface. Linux tends to have, usually has something called X Windows on top, which looks very similar. And you'll see one of the neat things about Linux is you have a lot of control over everything. That's both its greatness and its evilness. Is you can control anything you want. And if you're used to the Microsoft spoon-fed approach, Linux is going to be a bit for you. There are some spoon-fed versions of Linux, but for the most part, Linux is kind of designed to be like the Wild West, and you can decide what to do. Where does Linux come from? Well, Linux is actually a clone, a fresh rewrite of an older operating system called UNIX. Linux is a fresh from the ground, doesn't share any source code with UNIX, but does share a lot of the concepts of UNIX. So that begs the question, what is UNIX? Well, UNIX is an operating system that started its life about 1969, 1970, around in there, at AT&T Bell Labs. And there was a contract that Bell Labs had written with another company to write a multitasking operating system called PDP-7. It's an old computer, basically. You ever seen these science fiction movies with all the lights on and big tape reels, and they took half the room? That's what it was written for. This company backs out. Bell Labs said, we need something to replace it. So the guy named Dennis Ritchie and some other folks got together and said, well, we'll write an operating system on our own, and we'll call it UNIX. It stood for Uniplex Computer Services. Which is originally abbreviated UNICS. Somebody decided we'll call it UNIX. No one remembers who came up with that. UNIX started in the Unix world. Things are kind of from the hip, very loose. It's kind of got the hippie feel of the 1960s kind of going for a lot of ways. So take a lot of this stuff with kind of a grain of salt, and the history is kind of convoluted. We'll see where things have really played into each other over the history of time. So Unix started out with Bell Labs. They liked it. It was great. It was all written in assembly. Assembly language is very hard to work with language. It's literally really wacky things. Like if you want to add two numbers, you do things like say load accumulator A with the number 4, load increment accumulator A with the number 5, store the results at address 10, and congratulations, you just added two numbers together. You can imagine writing an entire operating system out of those little tiny instructions, right? And the bad thing with assembly is it's not very portable. You take it from one machine to another, you have to rewrite it from scratch. Well, along the way, Dennis Ritchie, one of the guys that helped write Unix, discovered, hey, we can write this in a higher level language, C, which is a language he has been working on, and that would allow us to move from one computer to another computer. I actually have a graphic here of the history of Unix. It's kind of hard for you guys to see in the background. I wouldn't ask you to read any of the stuff that's up here on it, but you'll see it gets rather complicated. What happened? This is back when they wrote the very first version of it, released it in Bell Labs. Came the second version of it, third version of it, came the fourth version of it, and about the fifth version of it, this is where they ported it over to C. And once you got onto C, any computer, any microprocessor that had a C compiler written for it could now run Unix. You just had to get the source code in C, do a few little tweaks here and there to make it work on your machine, compile it to your flavor of C, and you could run Unix on your machine. And you can see what that did to the operating system. Instantly, overnight, it started branching out. Everybody and their brother started buying and working with Unix. And AT&T basically gave it to you for free. If you're an institution like a college, they gave it to you for free. So here you go. Here's a great, wonderful operating system. Lets you run your computers and big mainframes and stuff, and it's yours for free for the taking. Don't sell it, but you can use it all you want. People then wrote different derivatives of that, different adaptations of that for different hardware, different purposes. They adopted Unix to do things like work with high-end graphical workstations, work to handle telephone systems, and behind the scenes, by about 1980, 81, 82, almost the entire world was running Unix. You probably never heard of it though, because the entire world at that time in terms of computing power was these big, huge mainframes, these embedded telephone systems, and these big satellite control systems and things that most people didn't have in their house. Okay? Somewhere around here, Microsoft gets involved. They release something called UNIX. Somewhere along in here, Berkeley College in California gets involved. They write a flavor called BSD. And this whole thing goes on. You get different flavors of this throughout time. Well, somewhere around in here, all these vendors got together and said, you know, the problem we have now, there's so many versions of Unix, we don't know how to write our applications anymore. I can't really say it's Unix compliant or you can compile it to Unix because there's so many different flavors of it. And your version of Unix has this little thing that my version over here doesn't have, and this guy's version has something over here none of us have, and it's very hard to write applications that will move across all those platforms. So they all got together and they commissioned a group called the Open Systems Group to write a standard, the Unix standard, called Unix 1. And the Open Systems Group came out and said, all right, we're going to sit down with you guys, write the standard, and anybody's operating system that complies with the standard can bear the name Unix. Okay? About this time, AT&T sold the name Unix to the Open Systems Group, but not the source code. And that becomes important a little later down the road. Several vendors wrote software compliant with the Open Systems Group. In fact, I have a graph here that shows that. You can kind of see, we started off the original AT&T Bell Labs version of Unix up here, and it branched out and formed off SCO, Santa Cruz operation, branched off to Berkeley and formed BSD. Then the SCO version, which was Unix, a rewrite of that came out and formed Cinex out of Siemens Company. The BSD stuff, it came down and it branched off to Cinex as well, branched over to SunWest, the Sun boxes. BSD 4.3 came down and became the standard of all these other versions. And you can kind of see how the whole Unix world plays on itself. You'll see that a lot. One guy gets a good idea, he says, hey, the rest of the world can use this. I don't want to get anything for it, just use it, but don't sell it. Open source, free to use what you want. So everybody keeps adapting everyone else's code, and you wind up with a family tree like this. So at one point in time, they all got together in 1985 and said, we need a single specification. We don't care how you achieve these features of these functions, you just have to do them. You have to comply to our API, our application program interface. And as long as you do that, you can bear the name Unix. This is where the Open Systems Group became involved. Right. Excuse me. Well, along about, and this is kind of just about today. There's another variant over here with AIX, and that's kind of where the Unix world was at about 1995. All these little different parents of these things. Some were free, some weren't free. Some were free for personal use. Some people charged you $5. Some people charged you thousands of dollars. Some of these run on big, huge iron. Some of these run on small iron. Along about this time, a gentleman over in Sweden, Finland, someplace over there, said, you know, I want to write an operating system. His name was Linus Torvalds. And he wrote Beginnings of an Operating System, posted it on, I believe, Usenet. It's kind of a news group. And a lot of other people saw what he was doing and said, hey, this is kind of neat. This is an open source version of the operating system, something we truly have. I can go by SCO, but I can't get the source code myself to modify. I can go by NAX, and I can't get the source code modified, but I can't use it. I like the version of the operating system I can modify. That's free for use. So he wrote this thing up from scratch, called it Linux, released it to the world, and the general idea with Linux is it's free. The source code is yours. Do with it what you will. If you make a change to the source code, you have to give it back to the community. Okay? It comes under a category called GNU's copy left. You'll see the word GNU pop up occasionally. The actual Linux operating system or Unix operating system is a kernel, a very small kernel that provides basic services, reading and writing drives, reading and writing the keyboard, and kernels and things. All the other commands that you run, all the other software that you run, is not really part of Unix or Linux. They're add-on packages that other people have written. You may get them from the person that gave you Linux, but they're really not part of the original Linux that Linus has released. They're not part of the original Unix and SCO releases. So these add-on packages, a lot of them are open source and freeware. One of the bigger groups is GNU. And GNU, believe it or not, stands for GNU is not Unix. It's a self-referencing acronym. They love stuff like that. So he wrote Linux, basic kernel. They tacked on the GNU utilities that have been released at that point in time. He wound up with a fairly robust version of a Unix-like operating system that, in theory, did not share any source code from any of the other versions of Unix that came before it. looked like it, smelled like it, quacked like it, but wasn't derived from it directly. At some point along in all this, some people started realizing, hey, I can get this Linux operating system for free. I don't have to pay Microsoft $400 for a copy of Windows 2000 to run in my data center. I can use Linux for free. So companies got a bright idea, wait a second, we can give away, or we can sell a free operating system, right? Because the copyleft license that you bought Linux under says you're allowed to sell it for reasonable cost if you add value to it. The only trick is, if you change it, you have to release that source code to the open source community. You retain the rights, but other people can see your source code. So a lot of companies like Red Hat, Debian, SUSE, all these guys started writing their own versions of Linux. They take the Linux kernel from Linus, maybe make some small changes or tweaks here and there to make it do something a little unique, add on some other utilities, and they sell it to you. That's called a distribution. And pretty much everybody's distribution will, has to add a core to say Linux, but they throw on different sets of bells and whistles. And you'll see that some people especially have got distributions that are really tiny. They're designed to run on floppy disks. They're designed to run these little business card CDs. They're designed to run on really slow, old machines, like 386 with a couple meg of memory in them. You'll see that other people have these gigantic releases of Linux that are designed to run on really big servers and have all sorts of web servers and web services and job engines in them, and the full bells and whistles that you can actually use to run a data center on. Okay? The business community's got one of this, and they started switching over to Linux. It's free. That's the deal about it. Or very cheap, $80 for a copy of Red Hat or something along those lines. So now the whole business world is kind of shifting over to Linux. And what's happened is the SCOs of the world who are selling UNIXware, their version of UNIX, aren't making as much money. Right? Sun isn't quite making as much money because they can't sell Solaris like these people are buying Linux. A lot of these guys, like IBM AIX and Solaris, they got smart and said, wait a second, let's get on the Linux bandwagon. They've written their own versions of Linux and are fully behind the open source community. The open source movement says software should be free, basically. And they're fully behind this movement over towards Linux. In fact, to the point where IBM has helped write some of the Linux kernel. SCO took a different tack. SCO said, we're losing business to this, we're going to start suing. Okay? They got the lawyers involved, basically, right? And they're claiming that in the latest releases of Linux, there's some portions of their source code for UNIXware in Linux. And they've gone to IBM. IBM, as you can see up here, IBM got a derivative of SCO UNIX via system V.32 over here to AIX. So they have a license to SCO to sell AIX for the UNIXware code in it. And SCO is suing IBM, claiming that IBM put some of their original UNIXware source code into the latest versions of Linux. Okay? Of course, IBM is saying, yeah, right, come get us. We're like a $500 billion company. You're like a $2 million company. We'll see you in court. Right? Of course, in the meantime, Microsoft has discovered that they're losing business to Linux. And Microsoft is really worried about people like you switching to Linux. They're not so much worried about the businesses because there's not a lot of business servers out there. There's, maybe a few million business servers. There's a few billion PC users out there. And Microsoft doesn't want you to give your $80 or your $90 to Red Hat or SUSE or something like that. They'd rather have it themselves. Well, Microsoft doesn't have a claim. They can't sue Linux. What Microsoft did, SCO went out to all these companies in the world and said, if you're using Linux, you owe us money. We're claiming that you're using our intellectual property in violation of our rights. We won't sue you if you pay a licensing fee. So SCO was desperate for money. They couldn't sue IBM. They didn't have the resources. Microsoft steps up and says, oh, Mr. SCO, we are so very sorry for using your code in our Xenix product that we have over here. We will give you, I believe it was $130 million or some astronomical amount like that, which of course gave SCO all the money they need to sue IBM. So you can see what happens when you get these kind of everyone plays and everything kind of thing. You get a wonderful, robust, free operating system, a wonderful community of people that support each other, sharing of ideas, lots of growth, lots of innovation, lots of really neat, wonderful things. And at some point in time, the lawyers get involved, which is not where we're at right now. What does it mean for you? Nothing. SCO is not going to come back and sue a single Unix individual user. They might sue IBM. IBM will probably buy them if it gets to be real bad. They might sue some big companies like Red Hat, maybe even a big company like I work for where they're using Linux, but they're not going to come out to sue individual people. It's just not going to happen. They don't have the resources to sue 4 billion people. They're not the RIAA. Okay, so that's basically kind of where Linux came from, convoluted history of Unix. I went brief that rather quickly to get all in. Does anybody have any questions about where all this stuff came from? Everyone just kind of numb to the whole whirlwind there? I will say that I've been working with SCO UNIXware, and before it was SCO UNIXware, it was actually Novell owned it. Before that, NCR owned it. I've been working with it since the NCR version. And the Unix operating system itself has been one of my greatest pleasures in the world to work with. It's very stable. Back in 1995, 96, people were rebooting their Microsoft PCs like on an hourly basis, right? I had UNIXware servers that, in fact, there's 2 of them out there still that have not been rebooted since 1996. Okay? The same PC you got on your desk that you can't keep running for more than an hour, so if you're lucky, I've had running for almost 6 years, going on 7 years now, okay, with UNIXware. The company I work for, we've decided to convert from UNIXware over to Linux. In fact, we're going out and replacing IBM OS2, which is another operating system, some DOS systems, SCO's Open Server product, which is a derivative of Unix, and SCO's UNIXware that we have on separate machines in all of our stores, 150 across the country, with one box running Linux. And instead of paying all those companies, roughly around $10,000 for all those copies of the different operating systems on PCs, we're putting the whole thing together for about $2,000. That's why companies are interested in this. For home users, why would you be interested in it? Well, I'm not a big lover of Microsoft. I've had lots of problems getting their software to work right, run reliably. I don't like the fact that the start button works this way. I don't like the fact that the shell works this way. I don't like the fact that I only have one choice in shells. I don't like the way things click and things work. I don't like the fact that it reboots all the time. I would much rather run Linux. One of the reasons I don't run Linux at home is that not quite all the applications are there for what I do. The majority of users, if you're doing word processing, web browsing, internet mail, internet chat, work with Palm Pilots, it's there. It's there. There are tools in Linux you won't believe. There's free versions of, there's the GIMP, which is GNU Image Manipulation tool. It outshines Photoshop for free. Okay? There's the Mozilla browser. It certainly outdoes Internet Explorer for free. There's OpenOffice that'll read all the Microsoft Word formats and Microsoft Office formats for free. Okay? So if you're a home user and you're just looking for basic computing, it's a really great way to go. In fact, there's a company called Windows that is selling a sub-$200 PC at Walmart that has the Windows operating system on it, which is actually Linux, prettied up to look like Windows, and they give you all those applications for free, all the GNU stuff for free. And you take it home from Walmart for $200 and you have a perfectly usable PC. You can sit in your living room and do all the things you do on your Windows machine back there. The only applications that I keep my Windows machines around for are some video editing stuff, which is just starting to get there in the Unix world with TD Cat and stuff. And I suspect another year or so, I'll make the leap on my video machines over to Linux. Any questions? Anyone scared? Deep right now? We have some versions of Linux, some things we like. We just need to play. We have some of them that run directly from CD. You just install a single thing on your machine. You just turn them on, and away they go. And if you just want to get your feet wet, it's a wonderful way to do that. With that, I'll turn it over. And he'll give you a brief rundown of all Linux stuff. If anybody would like to take home the Linux timeline, you're perfectly welcome to. Don't leave it here for us. I think it's a fire hazard.
That's very interesting. My name is Wally Hill, and I'm going to talk about a little bit. I'm going to cover a little bit of back, take off from the history, just a couple of tidbits. Just mention something, but I'm going to try to give examples of using it in real life in a home business type environment. And the reason is I'm kind of like I won't say it was testimonial or whatever, but I use it at home almost exclusively. You can't. There are things you have to use Windows for because some of the software tools and devices work without it. There's some games that just have to have. Gradually, things are overlapping. Where a lot of the Linux features and tools are moving on to the Windows environment. A lot of the tools and things in Windows the vendors are pushing them, buying them, making them available on the Linux environment. Quite often, one of the biggest negative things about the Linux is the hardware vendors not providing the drivers, because they have to release it or they have to make an order for this OS. They tend to make it for Windows, they tend to make it for Macintosh, and then they say, Linux, well, we don't want to support it, we don't want to get involved. But that's changing gradually. And there's a lot of standards in that industry and drivers and so forth that are helping that out so that you're going to have the functionality of more and more new equipment will work quickly under the Linux technology. They work on the Windows and so forth. One of the things about the history, I just go kind of backtrack. You mentioned that thing. One of the things that affected Linux and Unix is the corporations, like you were saying, there's another standard called POSIX, and that's where the government of the United States has so many computers out there, systems that use UNIX, and they started saying, we want to have a standard because we can't manage this. It's costing us a lot of money for all the different variations of it. So they established a thing called the POSIX requirement. And I think the Air Force for a while said, we will not allow a system to be used unless it meets these standards, the standard specification. That was POSIX. Well, part of the thing that Microsoft actually has some POSIX compliance built into its NT and so forth as well. It's not very well known in that, but that's one of the things that did transpire. So there's a lot of influence on Linux and Unix with a lot of the government in other, not only the United States, but other countries as well. But rather than getting into all that, there's a lot of that information on the internet. There's a tremendous amount of documentation and so forth out there. What I'm going to do is start, I've got a list of things that I kind of talk about on there, and covering something about more of the how to use it and different things you can see with it. I'll give you pointers to some sources. There's one place on the internet I like a lot. Let me bring it up. Bear with me 1 second.
Sit on the floor, Chuck. Not on the tips. Sweet.
This is the browser. There's a site out there called iBiblio.org. And iBiblio.org. Let me bring up another picture. Oh, it is? Okay, sorry. Sorry about that. Okay, here's an example of a Word document, and it's going to represent, it's going to show up the iBiblio name, hopefully. That's the website that I have a personal preference on, and it's at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. It's been around a long time, and they have a very complete selection of information regarding Linux and other open source tools and other information as well. They have things about music and so forth. This month of September, they have monthly topics. This month of September happens to be about Linux. It just happens to be. And so there's some more information. There's pointers from here to some of the other sites that can get you more information if you're interested in whatever details you want. There's also books at the bookstores and so forth. A lot of these things. Now this is an example of Open Office. And this is like Word for Windows, and it has pretty much comparable functionality. In some ways, it actually has some features that are maybe better than Windows. I don't know if you've used with Word. Sometimes with Word, if you're trying to do column headings and you have the 3 parts and so forth, I don't know if you mess with that. It's kind of sometimes difficult to do. There's some features in here that make it a lot easier to do that. So there's some things that Word can do maybe a little easier, and some things in here you can do a little easier, but they're comparable. What's really good is that a document, a document generated by somebody with Word can be loaded into this tool and worked on it and then saved back as a doc and back and forth. Occasionally there might be some minor adjustments and changes, so it may not be 100% perfect, and I'll warn you on that, but it's fairly close.
PC Magazine last month did some research how compatible Open Office is and some of the other free Office tools like Star Office with Microsoft Office. And generally it was about 97% of all the documents could be opened without any issue. There are 3% that just would not open correctly or display correctly, and there are about 2% that you had to tweak just slightly. So this thing is capable of reading, and they picked a very wide variety of documents. It's capable of reading almost 97% of all the things you'll ever create in Microsoft Office for free.
I'm going a little out of order here, but I will try to get back. When you use the internet, or when you use the computer system, what I wanted to address is the things you typically want to use on a computer system. So the most important use of the computer system, or from many people's point of view, is, and let me see if I can get there. Let's close this up. Hang on a second. Music. I have to play some music here. So you get these are things just like on the other system. I'm just trying to add a little humor to here because let me stop that guy. Okay. And of course, the other part that's real important for computer systems. By the way, this is a beta version of the Red Hat. It's one of the latest ones. It's only been out a couple of months. It hasn't been distributed out as a production version, but they make it available early for people to test out. So, and I like to keep a little more current on the OSs.
What version is it?
This is like 9. They gave it a number like 9.0.93 or something like that. You might consider it 9.1. They're going to probably renumber it to whatever they want. Now, what they've actually done, too, is they've kind of tweaked it or turned it into more, in my opinion, more like a Windows environment. You have your pull-up menu just like similar to Windows. You've got your start. If you go to the start here, it comes up, and it has things, okay, you want to do your system settings, and you get into the things about setting up your how your display looks, your keyboard, your mouse, sort of like your settings are under Windows. So they're doing a lot very similar to that. You have a start here, which is what we did earlier, which is like doing your computer, my computer, and then you get your directory, and you can see your other subdirectories you have. I'm not sure what I got here. I'm sorry, I meant home. My mistake. If you have home, it's like using my computer. So you get your home folders and so forth, and then you get your other things here. So it's very similar. So let me give you some more examples of some of the pages out here that you can do with it. Let me go through some of the tools real quick. This is using a thing called Conqueror that you're seeing. This is the tool here is called, if you look at the top there, I don't know if you can see that, it says Conqueror. It's like a Windows browser, but it can launch things. It's like a combination of like a browser that connects to the internet and the desktop with some smarts, so it makes it a little easier to go through. So that's kind of... And then I'm just going to show you some of the list of tools real quick, and then I'll show you some more examples. If you go through the menus here, I mentioned the games. So you gotta have games. So you got lots of games you want to play with. Some are pretty nice. Keep you busy for a while.
And these all came right off the standard distribution.
Right. This comes with the standard distribution. They shut quite a few games right off the bat.
This is Red Hat's distribution now.
Yeah,
SUSE would give different tools, may have a different look and feel to it.
Right. Now, and this is also using the KDE desktop. There's a Genome desktop. And a lot of these tools, a lot of this desktop is also being ported. It's the open source movement. They're being ported and being available on Windows as well. So you might see somebody actually run the Windows operating system, and this will be what it looks like on top, similar. It's kind of getting kind of overlapped on what the OS is and so forth between the things. But so some of the things there, one of the things that's interesting, if you're on the internet, you have your browser, which we'll show some more of that in a minute here, but you have like your instant messenger, AOL if you're doing instant messaging. Video conferencing, that'll connect with NetMeeting. I don't know if anybody uses NetMeeting. And then the office tools that you mentioned, you get is Office Calc is your spreadsheet. The drawing utility, the Impress is your PowerPoint type presentation. This is doing mathematical equations to draw those symbols, the epsilons and so forth, sigmas. The printer setup, and then the word processing, project management, and I'm not going to get into that part. Then you have other tools for certain, various other things, usual stuff you want. You have things to listen to music and so forth. The Red Hat actually had to remove some of the MP3 stuff because of some lawsuits and issues on copyright. I'm surprised Microsoft hasn't had to do that, so I'm not sure what the heck's going on there. Again, people are suing everybody. But it's interesting because one of the things that you got to keep in mind is like when you get a Linux package, you get this base operating system, and you get all these packed tools with it. And then you can say, well, I need to get, you probably may want to upgrade one of these bigger tools, like OpenOffice. You say, well, I want a newer version that has better features. You go out onto the internet and you go and reload it. And then you keep on updating these things. You can get them anytime you want, as need be, to get these things. And if you don't have OpenOffice, you can probably get it and put it on your system. Just like with the MP3, you can go out and get those MP3 things from other places, so you can get the software to do it. It's like it kind of, but the legality is still kind of not quite sure what's going on with the MP3 issues. So, let me give you some examples of uses of this. What I'm going to show you now. Back. Bear with me 1 second here, because what I'm going to do is bring up, this is using Conqueror, I'm going to bring up the Mozilla tool. I do a lot of command line, so people criticize that, but that's fine.
What is this you're doing?
I'm doing it. This is a command line way.
Oh, just like on the DOS.
It's like DOS, kind of, but
How do you get into that?
It's like a command tool window I brought up.
I couldn't find it on mine.
They're trying to actually hide it sometimes on the Linux, even they're trying to get to be more entirely GUI. But some things are really easier to do and so forth. And,
I haven't found anything that's easier yet.
There are. It's more when you get into software development and so forth.
You got to realize, since Linux comes from Unix, and Unix started back in 1969 or so, there weren't graphical terminals back then. And at its core, Linux still has a command line interface. They just have strapped X windows on top of this, and then other people have strapped GNOME and KDE and these window managers on top of X windows.
Right.
So at its core, it's still a command line driven operating system if you prefer command line.
Well, and NT is also a command underneath too, and people don't realize there's a lot of commands under NT you need to do from the command you cannot do with GUIs. So there's a lot of things that are very common in all the different places. Really, the GUI is just an interface. It's a human, they call it human interface nowadays. And then you have command lines, another interface. You're going to be able to do things maybe with your eyes. They have the ones, the mouse is another interface. It's just another interface. So it's good to be familiar and be able to use as many of the interfaces as appropriate, what makes sense to you and what you're comfortable with. This is the iBiblio site. I'm not on the internet, but if you went there, you would see these pages. I highly recommend looking at it. It talks about Linux being around for 12 years and so forth. Let's see if I can make it larger or not. Oops, too large. Anyway, they have in here, you got pointers to the archive where they have software. On the right here, you'll see the Linux distributions, and they have, I believe, they talk about open source and Linux distributions. If you go to that, there's a whole list of I don't know, 20 or so different packages in there. So this is a good site to go to. The documentation, if you want information about concepts and so forth. Now, the Sourceforge.net is a real interesting area. A lot of these packages, they came up with this method where they're going to have this website where they're going to have all this new packages managed at the site. So if you need a new tool to let's say to do a storefront on a website, so you're going to have it so people can place orders for you, whatever you want to sell. They actually will. You can probably search that SourceForge and find a package that may work, that may do part of the needs for you, that you have, and it may be free. So you can actually bring this down. It may take some work to implement it and so forth, but it may work just as well. So they have a lot of free software out there. It's just really loaded. I won't say it's easy until you get some of the software to work, and sometimes it takes a little bit of effort. But you can actually get some very excellent products, and so forth. I'm going to speed up a little bit here for time's sake. Okay, what I've done is this. Okay. Okay, what I have here, inside the picture, this is a Impress or a open office presentation that was put together by myself and a partner of mine, Jeff Connor. Let me go to the first page. Okay. So this is a PowerPoint presentation using the open source tool instead of using PowerPoint. So this is just a couple of slides from it we put together for this was presented this was done in a class that we taught at the Cates Center at Washington, associated with Washington University in St. Louis. So I'm in the computer security right now. And so it was a class on teaching, actually a hands-on on doing intrusion testing and so forth. So we have an outline, I just picked a few slides just to see that, you have yours. So it's a PowerPoint presentation. Okay. That's it. So,
Can this be run on a Windows machine?
if you can, I believe you can save it as I think you can save it as a PowerPoint, and then it will transfer, and you can actually load a PowerPoint in here. I don't know if you've been using PowerPoint and gone from different versions, you realize that they had a lot of problems because certain versions, they really screwed up when you went to the next version. There was a lot of incompatibility. There may be some incompatibilities here too. You usually have some problems because of the fonts and some things like that more than anything, but there's quite a bit of interoperability between the two.
Another alternative, OpenOffice, is available for Microsoft as well.
Yeah,
So.
the whole package will work under Windows as well. The idea is, one of the things that as a security professional and in general, as a citizen, good citizen, I try to push some ethics. And the idea is that when I did this work, we had this new business we're trying to do, and we didn't want to spend a lot of money for a lot of equipment. We didn't have the money. So the idea is, well, how much should we buy this package, buy this hardware? What do we do to get the business going? So you try to say you need to spend a certain amount, you kind of be frugal at times, and then whatever. We said, well, if we get the whole Office package, we only need PowerPoint and Word for what we thought we need. Mainly, we may need some spreadsheet stuff. But then we said, well, let's try this open office, and we don't have to buy this whole package. We'll do it on here. And then also we're doing development and testing, so we have multiple machines. I don't have to buy. We can buy one copy of XP or Windows 2000 or something like that. Use it on one machine, and then our other machines we can run as running Linux. And what's cool about it, like he's saying, we just put it, make a copy. So what I encourage is that I think nowadays in people's homes, it used to be like, it's almost like the TV. Some people didn't have any TV, and then all of a sudden everybody's got 3 or 4. That's happening with the PCs. You start off with one, and I think a lot of homes are getting 2, 3 PCs in their home. They're starting to network them. But a lot of people, I believe, I'm not saying they do this, but they'll take their Windows 98 or Windows 2000 or whatever, and they'll load it from one machine, they'll load it on another and another. That's illegal. You have to buy a license for each and every copy you have on your machine. Okay. So the idea is, well, rather than making everybody criminals or something, because you need to do this, and there's ways to, if you get some deals in education and so forth, discounts on the Windows. But if all you need is to do some more processing, and if this meets your needs, here's a solution that is an ethical solution, where you can just say, hey, run this thing, it runs well, you can do it legally, it's free, and it's less expensive, and more reliable. Gee, I don't know what I'm missing here. The only thing you're missing is some compatibility issues, or you're so used to the other one. So, almost look like, I remember, I won't give a story about my uncle and the Buicks, but buy a Buick every year, and then his paint came off, and within 1 year, and he got real upset. Buy a Toyota, So, and back then, Toyotas were really criticized. Now, Toyotas and Hondas are real popular, and some questionable.
Can you run QuickTime movies in that?
There's a, you can download the QuickTime viewing software. There's software, the GXI. There's some Xine tools you can get that'll do that on there. So,
If you have multiple
there's a PDF viewer, there's a QuickTime viewer, there's a, what do you call that, MPEG-4 type software, XMNS. There's a thing called GXine, or XINE, if you want to, I got to slide on some of the things on that, which is, it's a big package that says, you can run this thing, it'll run MP3s, it'll run movies, it runs a bunch of things all underneath it.
What was it?
Yeah, it's called XINE. Yeah, I don't know, it's the way the company's name or whatever. Again, if you go outside at SourceForge and say search for QuickTime or MP3s or whatever, and they'll have a list of 20 different things that you can try out. Now, some come with it. Some tools come with the system, and some don't. And then, like on the Knoppix, it comes with some viewing software is on something like XMS. There's another one called XMMS, and it comes with Knoppix and so forth. But anyway, this gives you an idea. This was done with real life, so it's real done as a business, and it worked fine. We did get the presentation. We use this in the classroom, just like we're using now, and it's working just fine. It hasn't locked up yet. Linux will lock up occasionally, by the way. So that all operating systems, there's so much changes in the software going on so fast. And like I say, because you can run the same software on the two OSs, and you could have similar situations. The issue is if you want to use Windows and you need to use it, go ahead and do it, but pay for it. If you don't want to pay for it, don't steal. Use some. If you can have an alternate, use the alternate, because then you're going to be legal about it. The ethics is very important now.
If you have multiple PCs at your home or in a business or at school, there's a Linux distribution called K through 12 Linux, geared towards schools. What they do is they give you just one CD to use on a server machine. You pick your biggest, fastest machine you have as a server. They give you other software to run on all your other machines, and they just act as basically dumb display terminals. So you can take an old 386 out of a closet, and it runs as fast as your fastest machine. It's actually running all the services on that other machine. The neat part about it is you're basically the teacher of the classroom. You can turn off those other machines when you want to. You can control what they can do. You can reset them all. So if you have a bunch of kids at your house, and your daughter or your son's always screwing up your PC, give them your old ancient PC, run it under K through 12 Linux off your big server machine you just bought at the last computer show, and at 10 o'clock at night you can turn their machine off, and the next morning turn it back on. Whatever they did to it doesn't matter. It comes right back where it was. And all free software.
I wish I could show you the GXine and the Xine thing, the motion watching movie video, but I didn't load the software yet on here. Unfortunately, also with the laptop, I got a very tiny disk drive. This is a beta, and I'm still putting it together and working with it, so I don't have everything stable, and I may end up just erasing it and reloading it when the real thing comes out, hopefully soon. You want the vendors to come out with the greatest stuff and be solid, and you want them to come out quickly, but you don't want it to come out and be broken all the time, so it's a toss-up. So, is there any questions on that, or any? No, so fine. Okay. So this is like PowerPoint. This is you call it Impress or presentation, open office presentation. And you have a lot of the same capabilities you have with PowerPoint. The newer PowerPoint is very nice too, by the way. I like some. There are a couple things I like a little better about PowerPoint than I do about this, but they're comparable. There's some things I like about this that PowerPoint doesn't have either, so it's So anyway, remember how to get this back? Okay. I apologize because I lumped it here. Remember the control sequence to get the windows back?
In escape.
Oh, just, yeah, you're right. Ah. There is a sequence, a Control Shift J or something, but a little rusty at doing that. Okay, moving along. Let's see here.
Where do you go to find the commands?
Okay,
A list of commands, so you, as you're playing, you can kind of learn as you go, kind of thing. You know what I mean?
okay. You want like a tutorial type method?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you just put that screen up there, you're doing root this, slash this, you know what I mean? A lot like you would see from, directory such and such. But Linux has a lot of different things, like the hard drive is HDD or
Right.
HDA, or, you know what I mean?
Right.
So,
How do you learn all that?
right.
That's a tough question, and there's a lot. That's what makes it kind of difficult. Actually, is there's so much there. There's such a wealth of tools and different things, like different types of drives, different equipment that you may not experience. Not that Windows doesn't have that; you just don't see a lot of that up front. It's kind of hidden from you.
But what I'm basically getting at is a person that has no knowledge of Linux.
Right.
And you're opening it up and you're saying, how do I do this?
Right.
Or, I'd like to get to this point, or I'd like to learn about how to do this.
One thing is, if you're used to things, you can just play it, fiddle with it. Get it loaded and play with it is, one of the good ways. There are some good books. You can get some books like Borders and so forth. There's tons of information about. The other way is when you buy the box version, not like at the Red Hat, they actually did come. They used to. I don't know if they do with a little book in there, which is like a beginner's guide to get you started going on it. But learning some of the idiosyncrasies of all these devices, it's really difficult. That's why there's that thing called the Linux documentation project. There's a lot of documentation online in there, but there's also a Linux documentation project that's on the internet, on the web, and you can do as well as you can do Google, and there's a lot of places putting information. And because there's so many people involved in this development of all these tools and support of them, there's a lot of people that experience something. They may post a message and say, I ran into this problem. Here's what I figured out. The only issue is there's so much of that, it's kind of hard to sift through it to find out the information you want. But the Linux documentation project, which is one of the websites here, if you go to the iBiblio, it's on the list there. That's a good place to you could do some queries, and it brings up documents about different things and so forth. And if you do get the licensing and so forth from the vendors, you may get some books from that, and you can also get support from the vendors and so forth. I'm not sure. It might be worthwhile to take the class as well. But getting into some of these, not everybody, depending on what your hardware is and what different things you're doing, not everybody will have all the same situations. So there's always unique things based on hardware. And there's these, I've got on my other machine, I have an NVIDIA, the TI board, 4200. And NVIDIA is pretty good with the Linux world by providing some of the software for the drivers. But it doesn't come from Red Hat. You've got NVIDIA probably, unless they make some deal, they're not going to give it to Red Hat. So you got to go to NVIDIA to get the driver to really make use of it properly and so forth. And they have quite a bit to install. They did some great things. So that's the way they did it. But that's pretty similar to when you buy a new board and you load it up from a CD. It's just that you typically have to get a lot of these across the internet because you're not buying it at the store, or they typically don't include it on a CD. Of course, most of the time on the CD is outdated anyway. By the time you load it, you got to go back out to the net.
I got dual monitors, and I ran the SUSC.
Oh, Susie?
Yeah. And it found both my monitors. The only thing was, I couldn't figure out how to make this one. If I got one here and one here, And if I want to go from this one to that one, I have to go out this way, and it comes in from that
Okay.
side.
Oh, okay.
And I couldn't figure out where in the hell you find it.
Yeah.
And then I said Red Hat, and it was fine.
Now, like with the NVIDIA, they gave me the information about, I got dual support too, and I tried that out. And they gave me some documentation I had to read, and it says, here's how you do it. And here it says, if you want to set up for one monitor or two monitors to duplicate each other, or do you want it to be which one's on the left and which one's on the right?
Yeah.
And then so forth.
Well, in Windows, you just go there and switch them around.
Yeah, some of the tools on the Windows are much easier to use in that area per se. They're getting better and comparable on here as well. But there are some way. I'm not sure exactly what video card you have and how it's set up to do that.
I got
But,
it all in under AGP
okay,
for one of them, and the other is PCI, but I don't remember what.
and I'm not sure. Now, one of the things I did on mine, I actually switched the cables around the monitors. Yeah, on the back, you get the two cards. I just switched it because then it went the right way. So I really wanted it.
Yeah, ATI is a general rule, particularly with the all-in-wonder cards in Linux. It's kind of a rough road to go. They don't get along too well.
Well, it worked fine with Windows, and it worked with that SUSE,
Yeah.
except that I could figure
Right.
on all
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, you don't have those tools.
With Red Hat, it just finds one
Yeah.
monitor.
Right.
Yeah, and that's one of the issues. ATI needs to be able to give you that same thing that you have in the Windows.
Yeah.
You didn't have a good tool in the Windows until you got the ATI software loaded.
Right.
And ATI is not so good on
Providing the Linux support. On the Red Hat site, if you go out, Red Hat, most of them, but Red Hat in particular, has a lot of PDF files out there to get you into Linux. There's specific guides of installation, beginners guides, administrators guides, users guides. There's a lot of information available.
Okay. I'm going to kind of wrap up a little bit here. Oh. I'm going to bring up a program that's just a viewing tool. And that was that image. I don't know if you can see that, but this is that Exine. I went out, this is Sourceforge. Zoom this in a little bit here. Is that better? Okay. This is going out at Sourceforge and searching for a tool, and I said search for the GXine, and it said, or Exine, and it says it's a free video player, and it mentioned here, and you can download the pieces and so forth. This is what you would see if you went to SourceForge, is how they operate and manage their software.
What is it called?
SourceForge. See what?
If you go to Unix.com, I find it on there.
Yeah. It's if you go to the Biblio or to the Linux.org, a lot of .org stuff, but in the Linux documentation, the point is, and if you do Google, is really great. And so if you look for the Exine or things in Google, they'll probably bring up the SourceForge and go there. So, this is the documentation, the Linux documentation project I mentioned. And that's, let's see if I can bring that up a little bit larger. Okay. So you can see, this is, the website is the Linux documentation. Okay, tldp.org, the letters here. And this is a good place to go to get, they actually use a Google search engine in there. Cool. Okay. Lots of stuff. And I'm getting close to, there's a PDF viewer, as you saw in the list, there's some recommended. One thing that's significantly different about Linux and Windows, if you try to run a web server on the internet, if you're running Windows, you have to run the server edition of Windows legally, by law. If you want to run a web server for the public to get to on the internet, and you want to run Linux, you can just run Linux. You don't need to get a different version. You can do it free. You don't have to buy a special thing. In other words, you can't take your Windows 98 or anything, put it on the internet and expect it. You can do it technically. You can't do it legally. And that's another reason I talk about the ethics and the reasoning. And here you got a tool where you can run the Apache software. It's typically very popular under the Linux. You can bring up the web server. It comes with it all bundled in on the Red Hat and these other distributions. So I can bring up a web server and put it on the internet right now. But you got to be with rules if you're a provider. If you're like a cable modem, you may not be allowed to have that. If you're DSL, you maybe. You got to check all that issues of what you're allowed to do. But you can run the service. You can put a box there and have this thing configured and get it up and running real quick. And it doesn't cost you any money for the software to run the website. It just takes your time and effort to build your pages and so forth. Okay, that's another thing. Well, since it's Linux, we got the viruses in our email for the user group here. And, I grabbed them. I thought this is cool, but I can't run them because I'm not running Windows. A lot of the viruses are targeted towards the Windows operating system, so they don't really impact you. It's not that you're totally safe. There are viruses that can happen on here. I haven't had. I'm pretty cautious. I haven't had any trouble so far that I know of. but I do enjoy picking them up and watching everybody go crazy. And I'm not having any problems per se with the viruses. There are some antivirus programs that I don't know how much they really do. And one of the things that makes it a little more complicated, there's interfaces on here, the tools called Wine and so forth, which let you run Windows type things. And those things can be susceptible to the same thing. So they overlap by talking to you. So it's always there. I haven't had to run, I don't really run any antivirus thing. But I've got a firewalling that comes in. I configure I'm in security, so I tighten it down, and I don't do a lot of things on certain machines. On some machines, we actually put a Linux machine out on the internet to have it be beaten up and have it be attacked. When it did, we try to watch it to collect it for knowledge and for doing and for classes to say, here's we put this out there, and who tried to feed into it, and where did they come from, and do gas and so forth, what they do. It's pretty amazing how fast things can happen. In some regards. I've been doing audits of computers on the internet for a long time, and it's interesting there too. As bad as things are, there are a lot of vulnerable sites that in the past that have never been bothered. They should have been, as far as you can tell. There may be the thing is everybody gets so hyped because somebody altered their web page, and change the picture, but that's not what you really. Who cares? I mean, really. Or they just they took it down. I don't know if you remember when Yahoo and those guys got attacked and they got their sites brought down and disabled and all that, and the press went crazy. After that, publicity, their stocks went up significantly. After that, their customer base revenues jumped like radically because they responded very well. They reacted very well to it. So, but they weren't damaged by it. The thing I push is a lot has to do with taking the measures to protect, like if you're running Windows, you're going to have to run your virus scan and keep that up to date. You need to run the firewalling software, Marcos firewall. I also recommend people putting those router boxes in front of them, and they're so cheap, $30 or so or $50. It's just worth it because of that, and that helps a lot. But a lot has to do with being worried about attacking things that can happen from your site. Well, they'll use your site and your facilities to attack others. You got to keep that in mind. There will be some new laws regarding that type of scenario, the due diligence and due care, saying you didn't do your job as a good citizen to keep your software and systems secure, and your system was used to attack some others, causing major damages, so you are liable. I don't like it. If you know about it, you should do something about it, though. Your brakes are ready to go. So we got to start wrapping up here.
Okay. Well, just about that, Linux is subject to the DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service attacks, and if you do run a server with Linux, the little 13-year-olds will jump in there. So if you see it bogging down and stuff like that, report to the FBI, because when I ran an ISP, we helped catch some guys that brought down a WorldNet and so forth.
You were at WorldNet?
No. I was running a nationwide dial-up. But we had Linux servers online, and they used us as part of the DDoS.
Oh, you were a zombie.
Yeah, right, exactly, a slave. Exactly. Yeah. But if you put it online with Linux, that if you got broadband, they'll probably use you.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I won't get into the security part because that's not part of the focus of this discussion. But a quick thing saying that when you do your security things, you got to do it in the layers. You just can't put it on your personal system. That's why I say put it on your PC's personal firewall, the virus thing, and then get that natting device, which is another firewall, which and does put rules on there, block things down. If you're running a business, you have your routers, you put rules on routers, and then you put them on your firewall, and you put them on your systems. and then you segment your architecture so you have some ways where you plan or expected something to happen. You don't want to like not one egg in all the basket. So there's a lot to think about. Anyway.
Hey, Robert, that's on the DSL. That is a bit down.
Which router are you talking about? Oh, yeah. Your dial-up, you're a little more, in a way you're more long, but in a way you're not. But they do have some that will dial up. And yeah, you can, I think some can do that now if you want to spend the money. I think some of them have the dial-up, and then you can have them do the firewall and adding in there as well. Yeah, so, yeah, it'd be effectively an hardware firewall, yes.
Now, McAfee personal firewall, they have a very good one out. I saw the evaluation on TechTV where you use trace IP address.
Where it appears to come from.
Right.
May look, we were talking about people coming from the United States going to Russia and attacking back in the United States. And it looks like it came from Russia, but it really is your neighbor next door. So, yeah, it's difficult. The other part, if you get software like this, trying to go back and trying to determine what the issues are and trying to retaliate, you could become more liable and cause more damage than good. So you got to be careful on that issue too. Okay, let me wrap it up on the Linux. We're back to Linux here. Sorry to get distracted here. So there's a lot of tools and a lot of there's a PDF viewer, and as I said there, to learn about it, I really recommend just like this Knoppix where you can boot it, play with it a lot. If you have certain needs with certain devices, there are user groups where, like that Linux documentation project, you can actually, and there's news groups out there you can get involved in and say, you know, I have these issues. Does anybody know?
Nobody ever asks the questions I want to know.
Well, you need to go to the right places, I guess, to ask them. And there are certain things that are really hard to get answers for sometimes. Excuse me. So, again, here's some of the, you can see all the different tools and choices you have to do different things. One of the things I quickly mentioned, there's a thing called GIMP, which is like your Photoshop. So people like to use Photoshop all over the place. But if you can do your Photoshop editing in GIMP, you don't want to spend the money for Photoshop, then maybe GIMP would be a good choice. So let me close this up. Just remember, this is a good place to go. And is there any other questions about Linux? How do you
can you use Linux with like I have a partition, big hard drive partition down, and on the first portion, the first partition on the drive, I have open for a second operating system. Can I use that with Partition Magic Linux?
Okay. I'm sorry. You had the first partition was part.
Well, yeah, like you have your C drives. Then on a D drive, I partition that thing down. Okay, so D right now, that partition is open.
Oh, okay.
For another operating system. I think the way Partition Magic works, you have to go in there and use that first part of the partition. Wow, and where I'd set up like on a dual boot. So, is there? I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is Linux compatible with Partition Magic.
The newer Partition Magics can actually make Linux partition accurately. You can create the file system out there, and yeah, you can install it and boot it. Or you can have if you have Windows, you can actually have that boot Linux with the other partition. There's ways to do different things, or boot from a floppy. So yes, it should be able to do that.
I can show you. This machine's got it like that. It's got Windows and Linux on two partitions, and I can show you.
You have no conflict in partition on one drive, Windows on one, Linux on the other.
Different partitions, yeah.
You have no conflict.
No, I have no problem.
Although it's usually a better idea to install Windows first if you're going to use it.
Yeah, if you're going to do that, do the Windows install first and then the Linux. If you're installing Windows and it finds Linux out there, it's messed up.
Must be a bug with your.
Simplest way is to have an extra hard drive. That Linux on one and Windows on the other.
Yeah.
Hard drive is a cheap now.
Major distributions should install right onto the partition.
Yeah, I didn't know. there was a conflict problem with Linux and our partition manager. Because on the big drive, I'm using a lot of Windows stuff. Yeah, program games and whatever. Backup, so.
Not a bad idea, you should just go a whole separate drive too.
Well, I got
You know,
two drives on it now, so I'm
if you got a lot
C
of
drive,
stuff,
and then I've got
if you got a lot of stuff you don't want to lose, then putting it onto a new separate drive is not bad. Just sometimes you can get the partition comes messed up. Or is this a backup?
Yeah, well, that partition magic is a backup program, and then backup everything else in the C drive, which is the main drive. These special programs that I use on this.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to do the last part of this demonstration. What I want to talk to you about are the various and sundry flavors, or what we call distributions in Linux. If you go off to linux.org, which is one of the main link sites to go in to find the various and the sundry ISA images and stuff out there. When I did it, they came back and told me that there's 46 different versions available, and I can assure you that that is a lie. The number is substantially larger than 46. But I pulled a couple of them here that we're going to talk about a little bit. First one is College Linux. This is a Linux distribution based upon Slackware, which is one of the older distributions. It was real popular in the late 90s, and it was one of the real up-and-comers, and it's kind of since fallen back. What it has is a very nice, simple, easy interface. Robert Kennedy College in Switzerland requires this for all their incoming students. And it is a single disk install on their system, and it gives you everything you need to know all in one nice shot, and we do have that back there. The Debian distribution is a very complete distribution. It's not cutting edge, but it is rock solid in what it has out there. And the one thing about it is Linux has a lot of open source stuff in it. It has some other stuff which is open source, but you are required to have some licenses to use it in certain ways or some restrictions. The Debian distribution does not have that. The whole thing is open and clean and clear and ready to roll. And we do have this available. We don't have it here. You need to come see me, and we can get some of these things put off for you, but not tonight, because we're talking anywhere between 3 and 7 disks for these things, and we're not just going to blindly make copies of these. One of the special purpose ones is this one here called Firecast, and it runs a kiosk machine where you have touchscreens on it. Makes it real nice. You'll see this distribution used in a lot of the internet cafes because they can lock down what you're going to do and only what you're going to do, and you can run the whole thing with a touchscreen. When you turn it off, it goes away, and it comes back, and they know exactly where it is. It's a cute distribution to play with. This is what Chuck was talking about, and I was chewing on him about using my demo, K through 12 Linux. This is a very interesting distribution if you're in any kind of an educational environment or, again, in an internet cafe. It consists of two different things. One is a client, which works on the various and sundry computers that are used as terminals that the people work with. And these can be lowly 386s and 486s, and Linux will run quite nicely on the 486, believe it or not. Then you have a client machine, the server machine, which should be a very fast machine. You're talking now, here's thinking, 1.6 to 2.8 gigahertz machine with the hard drive space on it. All these clients go back and run off of this fast machine. So you're really not bogged down by having an older, slower machine for the people to mess with. The advantage is when they turn off that client machine, the whole darn thing goes away. You don't care what they did because the server's locked down. They can't affect that. The next person comes in, turns it on, it's a whole brand new, clean startup. Just like you want it to be, so you know where it is every time it's turned on. And we do have the client and the other version of this available. Mike doesn't have it over there, but I've got it at home if someone's interested in it.
How big is the client on that one?
A disk.
One disk?
One disk. And out on their site, if you don't want to mess with us, go out to their site. They've got the tools out there to build it and how to do it, and talk you through the whole thing. Got a real good set of documentation on how to set this whole mess up. The next one here that we have, this is Canopix. This is an interesting distribution. This is what we call a live Linux distribution. Everything you need to run this is on a CD. You put the CD in your machine, you turn it on, and you have Linux. Canopix is recognized as one of the better ones for doing this. It has everything you need in it, and it's quite nice. And I don't know where Kenny got way here on me. We had a couple of our users working with this, and they found it quite satisfactory and everything you want, and we do have that back there. Lindows, Chuck talked a little bit about Lindows. This is a Linux distribution. It looks like and acts like Windows. LinuxInstall.org, this is one of the ones we have in the back. This is a single distribution disk that has everything on it you need. It is a very automatic install. It's based upon the Red Hat 8.0 package. Take your hard drive, wipe everything off, get all your partitions off it so it's a raw hard drive. Don't want anything, no partitions on it, nothing formatted. Go into your BIOS, tell your BIOS you want to boot from your CD-ROM drive, turn it on and walk away. 90 minutes later, you are running. It has everything on there you want. It has an office, it has 2 office suites, it has 2 or 3 browsers on it, whole 9 yards, ready to run. Real nice and simple and painless.
And is that Mandrake, or are you talking about Linux?
The LinuxInstall.org is a Red Hat based on a Red Hat distribution.
Okay.
Mandrake is another older Linux distribution. It's not as popular as what it is. It is, again, a very stable distribution and a good distribution to work with. They've kind of fallen a little bit out of favor. They've gotten some financial troubles. They are known for putting out new releases. I think they have a commitment to put out a new release every 6 months, and they've got themselves wrapped up around that a few times. But it is a very good distribution. This one here, I edited and lost part of it. It's actually called Fast Puppy. And it is one of the special purpose Linux distributions. If you have a USB hub on your machine and you have a card reader that can boot, or you have one of these jump drives, 30 meg distribution, you put it in here, you set it to boot from your USB drive, 20 seconds from power on, you have a full Linux distribution up with a GUI and an Office suite and Mozilla browser. That's almost instant on. Got an old notebook you don't know what you're doing with? There you go. Another one, and we have this one back here, is called Damn Small Linux. This is a 50 meg distribution, does the same thing. I burned the first one. I says, this thing can't be working. It must have made a copy in about 35 seconds. So we went and we tested them. This is about a minute and a half load onto a machine. This is live. It runs right from the CD, and it's got everything you want on it. So if you're looking for something nice and fast and clean, and you've got an old machine you're not using, this is a real quick, easy way to go. Red Hat is if you're going to do a U.S. distribution, and Red Hat is probably the one to go. It's the one that's the most popular. It's the one that's most supported. It is a very, very complete distribution. Their Red Hat Package Manager System, RPM, is a very nice, easy package manager to install and remove and update packages on it. It's much simpler than what Windows ever thought about being. Slackware is another distribution. Again, like I said, it's an older distribution. It works rather well on some of the older machines. I don't know how popular it is anymore. I haven't seen it really around a lot. SUSE comes 2 flavors. We have the live version back here where you can boot it up. I like its Windows, and I like its screens, and I like the way it looks and feels a little better than I do Canopix. It's German distribution. If you're going to do a full install of the 7 disks, when you're trying to look for support, they have a Flash is called their install package. It's kind of hard sometimes to find some of the English documentation of this program, but it is a full and complete distribution. This is the ones that we've talked about. In addition to these, there are many, 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 many more distributions, and you're going to see more and more Linux. You are all going to have Linux in your house someplace, I'll guarantee you, within the next 3 to 5 years. It's going to be in your television sets, it's going to be in your DVD players, it's going to be in any high-definition TV you get, because they can get it for free. They can customize those kernels in the way they want to make it do what they want, and they're not paying royalties out the wazoo to all the companies in the world to do these things. There's a distribution out there called X Games. It takes all the old MAME stuff that we've been talking about, you put it in and up they come and away you go. There's another special distribution out there that we have been looking at using, that we're trying to solve some of the problems that members are having with the video discs. We don't know what drivers you have. We don't know what video cards you have. We don't know what you're doing on your computer. There is a multimedia Linux distribution out there that will take and put the video file on it, you put this disk in, you turn it on, and it goes off and it runs and it loads and it's done. And it's rock solid as can be. And it takes care of all the problems with drivers and do you have the right codecs and all this other stuff. It's all automatic and it's free. Multimedia Linux. Okay?
You put the OS and the video
Uh-huh.
on the same
Uh-huh.
disk?
The whole 9 yards. It works like the live Linux distributions do, except again that they've thrown away, the Office suites and all the other stuff. You just got it down to run in the player, and away you go.
So what kind of video editing software runs on?
That's where the problem comes in. There's probably some, I'm not aware of any, that's really very popular in the video editing side. You're pretty much stuck in the Windows and the Macintosh area for right now. And there is a real issue that I've got. I have several Linux boxes running, and I have removable trays, so I can play around with whatever I want. And when I put it in the machines that have the ATI all-in-one capture card in there, man, the fun just starts. It just does not like those cards. And I have an old 7500, and the 8500 Chuck's got one of those. It doesn't like that either. And the newer it gets, the worse it gets on that. Now, I am able to get my NVIDIA card to play back, but the ATI card, there's just not any support out there for it. If you're interested in the video side, there's sites out there that you can go off and query, and they'll tell you what hardware works with which. And you need to stick with what hardware, really works with the distribution that you got in the package you want. And that concludes what I'm going to say.
Big boys. It works with the big boys, how they roll.
Yeah. The video area, the editing area, I think is one of the areas where Linux is somewhat lacking right now. There are some players out there. There's a lot of multimedia players out there. The Red Hat distribution comes with the CDR burner built right in. There's nothing else to load, no messing around. It's got 2 of them actually. It has a GUI one, which most people would use, and it has one out there that works from the command like, man, you can't believe that sucker. It makes CDs like crazy, real fast, and they work every single time. There are other software packages. I've got a machine sitting over here. It's got a 7.3 distribution on it. It is, you don't know it, you see it sometimes. It is the website backup. Right now, I have it pulled off of there. That's Player, multimedia player. But I have Samba loaded on these machines, and Samba is...
And it's running QuickTime? It runs QuickTime?
Oh, yeah.
No, that wasn't.
QuickTime is supported in Linux, by the way, to answer your question. Yes, it'll play AVI files. The players are there. It's the editing software to create them that's lacking.
But you can go outside the environment, edit, you bring it in.
Yes, yes. And Samba is a program that will let your Windows machines look at a Linux machine, and you can go off and move files back and forth. It just sees it out there. It just looks like another machine. It's got some strange names for some disk drives, but you can get used to that, and you can access it. You have Red Hat will load Apache as a default. Again, they have server installs on them, so it's out there. You just type localhost. There's your website. It's up. If it's internal, it's an intranet, not an internet now. That's within your own system. Great little things to have. Everybody should have one at home. Why do I have it? Documents are out there. Reference materials out there. Dictionary stuff's out there. Why have it on 4 different machines, out of room and in a house? It's all in one place. Just hit that box. It's an icon sitting on my Windows desktop. I don't care where it goes. When you hit an icon on your Internet Explorer, do you know where it goes? Do you know what's serving it to you? Chances are 80% it's coming off a Linux box. And that concludes my portion of the demo. That's it for the evening. Still time to go buy some discs. You gotta look. Yes, sir. It'll run so when I was working, I had 246. start and actually working with her.
Yeah, that
Anything we got?
yeah, it's on C.